My parents told everyone I failed. I sat quietly at my brother's engagement dinner. Then his fiancée looked at me and whispered, "Wait, you're Kayla Carter." The room stopped. Even my father couldn't speak. Thank you for being here with me today. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. I'd love it if you could share in the comments which city or country you're watching from and what time it is there now. Let's begin our story together. The invitation lay on my worn kitchen counter, its creamy cardstock and embossed lettering a stark contrast to the chipped formica. Jason Carter and Sarah Miller request the pleasure of your company. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons, a royal decree I couldn't ignore. The engagement dinner. My younger brother Jason, the family's golden boy, was getting married, and I, Kayla Carter, the 32-year-old family disappointment, was expected to attend and play my part. A familiar tightness cinched my chest like old barbed wire being twisted anew. 10 years since I'd walked away from medical school, and the brand of failure still felt seared into my skin. I could still smell the sharp, cloying scent of formaldehyde from the anatomy lab, a scent that had once symbolized intellectual pursuit, but had slowly morphed into the odor of my own suffocation. I remembered standing before my father Richard in his mahogany-paneled study. The words, "I can't do this anymore," had tasted like ash in my mouth. His reaction wasn't the explosion I'd braced for. Worse, it was silence, cold and heavy as a granite tombstone. A silence that stretched for weeks, punctuated only by the grave pronouncements that I'd thrown away a golden opportunity, that I'd spit on the sacrifices they'd made. His office, usually smelling of old leather-bound books and the faint metallic tang of success, had felt like a courtroom, and my sentence was lifelong underachievement. My mother Susan had reacted with a rush of tears. I'd hear her on the phone with her sisters, her voice a stage whisper carrying through the too-thin walls of our house, lamenting how I was lost, how I was just drifting. Her signature phrase, always delivered with a dramatic fluttering hand to her chest, was, "Oh, Kayla, we just worry so much about your future." It was inevitably followed by a sigh that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room, a sigh that implied my future was a bleak, barren landscape of her own imagining. She never asked what I wanted my future to be. She only mourned the one they had designed for me. While I was drifting, Jason was soaring. Business degree from a top-tier school, a fast track into a high-paying finance job downtown, a sleek new condo with views that screamed, "I've made it." Family dinners, when I could stomach them, became showcases for Jason's latest triumph. I remember one Christmas vividly. The scent of pine needles and roasting turkey filled the air, a normally comforting aroma that now felt oppressive. Jason unwrapped a ludicrously expensive watch from Dad, who clapped him on the back, his voice booming, "That's my boy, making his mark, setting the world on fire." Earlier, I had tried to explain a fledgling idea I had for a community-based tech project, something to help people navigate local resources. I'd received a polite, dismissive nod from Dad and a, "Well, Kayla, good to keep yourself busy, daughter." The implication hung heavy in the air, busy with hobbies, not with a real career. Jason, meanwhile, would offer me condescending advice cloaked in brotherly concern about getting serious and finding my footing. His own feet, so firmly planted on the fast track, he couldn't imagine any other path. Those first few years after med school were a blur of cheap apartments that smelled of instant noodles and stale loneliness, part-time jobs that paid the bills but chipped away at my soul. The question haunted my sleepless nights. Were they right? Was I a failure? The weight of their disappointment felt like a physical burden, a cloak I couldn't shed. The idea for Access Path didn't arrive in a flash of divine inspiration. It was a slow burn, kindled by an experience volunteering at a local disability resource center. I saw firsthand the daily, soul-crushing frustrations of people tangled in bureaucratic red tape, fighting for basic healthcare information, for access to specialists, for a sliver of dignity. I started small, a side project fueled by black coffee and a stubborn refusal to believe things couldn't be better. I taught myself to code properly, building a simple, shareable database of local, accessible healthcare providers. The work was all-consuming, done in the quiet solitude of my tiny apartment, the glow of my monitor, my only companion through countless late nights. The hum of the old desktop computer was a steady, comforting presence. And then the first email arrived. Your little program helped me find a doctor who actually understands my condition. Thank you. A spark, a warmth that spread through my chest, a feeling of purpose so potent it momentarily eclipsed the years of familial disapproval. It was at a local tech meetup, amidst the drone of a presenter and the smell of lukewarm pizza, that I met David Chun. He was brilliant, a coder leagues ahead of me. But more importantly, he saw the potential in Access Path when my own family couldn't or wouldn't. He saw the mission. We became co-founders, partners. Our first shared office space was a glorified closet above a noisy print shop, small, cluttered, and perpetually smelling of industrial ink and David's ever-present, overly strong coffee. But it buzzed with an energy, a sense of creation that was intoxicating. It was our sanctuary. Access Path grew quietly, steadily. 10,000 users, 50,000. Our first small grant. We onboarded our first nonprofit clients, expanding state by state. Each milestone was a private victory, a silent rebuttal to the narrative my family had crafted for me. I tried a few times to share these successes. I remember excitedly telling Mom about a successful pilot program we'd launched in a neighboring state, how it was projected to help thousands. She'd listened with that familiar distracted air, her eyes glazing over. "That's nice, dear," she'd said, her focus already shifting. "Did you hear Jason just got a huge promotion? He's thinking of buying a boat. He's taking us all out to a fancy dinner to celebrate." The deflation was instant, a familiar cold fist clenching in my gut. It was always back to Jason. And now, Jason's engagement dinner? The family group chat had exploded with exclamation points and heart emojis when he posted the picture of Sarah, her hand artfully displayed, the diamond winking ostentatiously. I'd typed a perfunctory "congratulations" and muted the notifications. The cheerful din felt a million miles away from my reality. The dread for this dinner was a palpable thing, a knot in my stomach that had been tightening for weeks. I knew the script. I'd be the living embodiment of the before picture in Jason's after. Dad would deliver his subtle and not so subtle digs, his State of the Union on my perceived lack of progress. Mom would flutter with anxious glances, her sighs punctuating his pronouncements. Jason, bless his heart, would offer that uniquely patronizing brand of pity only a successful younger sibling can muster. But as I stood before my closet that evening, a tiny rebellious spark ignited within me, a weariness of their narrative. I looked at the stats for Access Path on my phone before shutting it down. 80,000 active users. Real people whose lives were a little bit easier because of something I'd built. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips, a flicker of pride I rarely allowed myself. Instead of the drab, safe suit Mom always subtly pressured me to wear, the one that made me feel like an undertaker at my own funeral, I reached for the newer, charcoal gray one. I'd bought it with a small bonus after we'd closed a particularly challenging but rewarding contract. It fit well. It made me feel capable. It was a small thing, a nearly unconscious act of defiance, but it felt like a breath of fresh air before stepping into the gilded cage. Latoile. The name itself dripped with the kind of ostentation my parents adored. As I handed my keys to the valet, the scent of expensive perfume and even more expensive food wafted from the ornate entrance. Inside, the restaurant was a hushed symphony of clinking crystal, murmured conversations, and the subtle scrape of silver on china. The kind of place where you felt your bank balance being silently assessed by the maitre d'. My collar, which had felt perfectly comfortable minutes before, suddenly seemed to be tightening around my throat. I spotted them almost immediately, ensconced at a prime circular table in the center of the room, a tableau of familiar bliss for public consumption. My father, Richard, was holding court, his voice a low rumble as he regaled Sarah's parents with what was likely an anecdote showcasing his own business acumen. My mother, Susan, fluttered around Sarah like a nervous hummingbird, adjusting an imaginary stray hair on Sarah's perfectly coiffed head. And Jason, my little brother, looked every inch the young master of the universe, impeccably attired in a suit that probably cost more than my first car, a confident, almost predatory smirk playing on his lips, his signature expression of smug superiority. "Kayla, glad you could make it," Dad said. His handshake was perfunctory, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. The unspoken addendum: don't embarrass us. Mom enveloped me in a hug that was too tight, too brief, smelling faintly of her preferred lily-of-the-valley perfume, a scent I now irrevocably associated with anxiety-filled family events. "Oh, Kayla, you look neat," she chirped, her eyes flicking over my suit with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Surprise? Relief that I wasn't wearing a stained t-shirt? "Sarah, darling, this is our Kayla." Sarah Miller turned, extending a hand. Her smile was genuine, her handshake firm, her hazel eyes warm and direct. "So nice to finally meet you, Kayla," she said. And for a fleeting second, I felt a flicker of something other than dread. She seemed normal, grounded, a stark contrast to the often strained formality and underlying tension that usually characterized Carter family gatherings. I managed a small, awkward smile in return. "You too, Sarah. Congratulations to you both." The conversation, or rather the monologue, quickly steered by my parents, revolved around Jason. His latest financial conquest at the firm, his upcoming promotion to vice president, the fantastic old money family Sarah hailed from. Each statement felt like another carefully placed stone in the wall that separated me from their glittering world, another layer of varnish on Jason's golden image. When Sarah's father, a jovial man named Arthur, politely asked me what I did, Dad interjected before I could form a sentence. "Kayla's our free spirit," he boomed, a hearty laugh accompanying the words that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Still chasing butterflies, eh, daughter?" He winked at Arthur as if sharing an inside joke, the kind that makes you the punchline. I felt the familiar heat rise in my neck. "I run a tech company," I murmured, the words feeling inadequate, flimsy, in the face of their grand pronouncements about Jason. Mom, ever the skilled conversational navigator, away from uncomfortable subjects, namely me, quickly chimed in. "Oh, but Jason's new role, Arthur. It involves managing a portfolio worth tens of millions. He tries to explain it to us, but it's all so terribly complex and important, isn't it, dear?" She beamed at Jason, then shot me a look that clearly communicated, "See, Kayla, this is what real success sounds like." Jason, never one to miss an opportunity to subtly assert his dominance, leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, the market's been volatile, a real beast, but we're navigating it pretty well. Big responsibilities, you know." He glanced my way, a flicker of that familiar condescension in his eyes. Not everyone's cut out for that kind of pressure, I guess. Pressure, I almost scoffed. I thought of the frantic all-nighters with David when our main server had crashed, just as we were launching a critical update for a state healthcare partner. The livelihoods of thousands of our users hanging in the balance. I thought of the crushing weight of payroll when we were just starting out, the constant, gnawing fear of letting our small team down. But I said nothing. I focused on the intricate pattern of the bread plate before me, the taste of the expensive, artfully arranged food turning to ash in my mouth. The silence from my end of the table was a chasm. My contributions to the family narrative were apparently best left unsaid. Despite my family's conversational bulldozing, Sarah seemed genuinely curious. She managed to direct a few more questions my way during a lull, when Dad was pontificating to her mother about his golf handicap. "A tech company, Kayla? What kind of platform is it?" "It's a platform that helps people with disabilities access healthcare services and resources more easily," I explained, keeping my voice low. Before Sarah could respond, Dad, his attention momentarily diverted back to our side of the conversation, cut in with his signature dismissive hand wave. "Very niche, of course. A wonderful passion project for Kayla. Keeps her occupied. We're still hoping she'll find something a bit more substantial. Something with a clear career path, you know." I saw Sarah frown, just for a second, at Dad's interruption. She looked at me thoughtfully, a puzzled expression in her intelligent eyes. She opened her mouth as if to ask another question, but Mom, sensing an opening, launched into an animated, overly loud anecdote about Jason's adorable childhood fear of clowns, effectively derailing any further inquiry into my passion project. A painful memory surfaced unbidden. Dad on the phone a few months back, his voice carrying from his study. He'd been talking to his old friend and golfing buddy, Mr. Henderson. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but snippets had drifted out. "No, Kayla's still tinkering away on that little website of hers. A lovely idea, of course, bless her heart, but not exactly setting the world on fire, you know, not like Jason. Now he's really going places." My father hadn't just been dismissive to my face, he'd been actively curating the narrative of my failure to his peers, solidifying my status as the family's resident underachiever. The memory left a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, like an old penny. The toasts began. Sarah's father gave a warm, heartfelt speech welcoming Jason into their family. Then it was Dad's turn. He stood, glass raised, his voice resonating with practiced paternal pride as he extolled Jason's virtues. "A son who has never given us a moment's worry," he declared, his gaze sweeping the table, "who has exceeded every lofty expectation we ever dared to dream for him. A true success story, a beacon of what hard work and dedication can achieve." Then came the inevitable, expertly executed pivot. He glanced my way, his expression softening into one of performative, almost mournful pity. "Of course," he continued, his voice taking on a more somber tone, "life isn't a straight path for everyone. Some take detours. Some march to the beat of a different drum, however faint. We continue to support Kayla, naturally, in finding her way, in discovering her own version of contribution." The words, though couched in feigned understanding, were a public branding. Kayla, the detour. Kayla, the faint drumbeat. Kayla, still lost. I stared at the pristine white tablecloth, the expensive linen suddenly feeling like sandpaper beneath my fingertips. I could hear Mom's soft, perfectly timed sniffle beside me, her supporting act in this family drama. The air grew thick with unspoken judgments, with the weight of their collective disappointment. I could feel Sarah's eyes on me, a silent, searching question in them. And in that moment, a wave of utter resignation washed over me. A voice whispered in the deepest recesses of my mind, "So this is it again. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'll never escape this shadow." The silence that followed my father's toast was heavy, broken only by the polite, almost nervous clinking of glasses as people took a perfunctory sip. I kept my gaze fixed on the intricate weave of the tablecloth, bracing myself for the remainder of the evening, which I knew would unfold along the same predictable, painful lines. This was my role, my preordained script in the Carter family saga. The quiet, unremarkable daughter, a living testament to unfulfilled potential. My parents were basking in the afterglow of Dad's speech, a portrait of parental pride. Jason, ever the gracious recipient of accolades, nodded with a practiced humility that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was then that Sarah turned to me, her brow furrowed in thought. She spoke softly, but in the momentary lull, her voice seemed to cut through the ambient restaurant noise with surprising clarity. "Access Path," she began, her hazel eyes fixed on mine. "You said it helps people with disabilities navigate the healthcare system." I nodded, surprised she'd remembered, or even cared, amidst the Jason-centric deluge of conversation. "Yes, that's the core of it. We try to streamline access to specialists, consolidate resources, connect people with support networks, make a complicated process a little less overwhelming." Her eyes, already wide with interest, seemed to ignite from within. "And your name? It's Kayla Carter?" she pressed, leaning in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that nevertheless seemed to make the air around our table crackle with sudden attentiveness. "Wait a minute," she breathed. "Are you the Kayla Carter?" "The CEO of Access Path." The sound of a fork clattering against a china plate a table away was unnaturally loud in the sudden, profound hush that fell over our group. I looked up, startled by the intensity in her voice. My father, who had been in the middle of taking a self-important sip of his wine, froze, the glass halfway to his lips, his eyes wide and unblinking. My mother's perfectly painted smile had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. Her hand instinctively flew to the pearls at her throat. Jason, who had been smirking at some private joke, stared at me, his face wiped clean of all expression, save for utter dumbfounded shock. Even Sarah's parents, who had been politely listening to my father, now looked at our end of the table with a new, sharp intrigue, sensing the sudden, inexplicable shift in the atmosphere. Before I could confirm or deny, before I could even process the implications of her question, Sarah's face lit up with an almost incandescent excitement. She seemed completely oblivious to the emotional bomb she just detonated within the Carter family. Or perhaps she was only just beginning to register its shockwaves. "Oh my God, it is you," she exclaimed, her voice gaining volume and vibrancy with each word. "Access Path is incredible." "My brother, Mark, he was paralyzed in a car accident 3 years ago. Your platform has been an absolute lifeline for him. The doctors at his rehabilitation hospital, they recommend it to all their long-term care patients." She turned to the rest of the table, her voice ringing with a genuine, unbridled passion that was both startling and captivating. You have no idea what a difference it makes. Trying to find specialists who understood his specific needs, coordinating care between multiple doctors, navigating the insurance nightmares. It was a constant, exhausting battle for our whole family. Access Path simplified so much of it. Mark actually connected with an adaptive sports program through one of your resource links. He says it gave him his life back, a sense of community he thought he'd lost forever. She gushed about specific features. The curated database of accessible clinics that Dad had dismissed as niche. The secure peer support forums where Mark had found solace and practical advice. The integrated telehealth options that saved him exhausting trips to outpatient facilities. She even mentioned reading an article some months ago about the visionary, albeit low-profile CEO behind this transformative platform. Never for a moment dreaming it was her future sister-in-law, the family's resident free spirit. We've been trying to get our hospital foundation to officially partner with Access Path for months, she declared, looking at me with something akin to awe. The impact you're having is phenomenal. A wave of heat washed over me, followed by a strange, disorienting lightness, as if the floor had tilted beneath my feet. It was like watching a scene from someone else's life, a life where I wasn't the perpetual disappointment. I saw my father's face, usually so ruddy and confident, drain of color, leaving it a mottled, pasty gray. My mother's lips moved silently, her eyes wide and tear-filled, darting between me and Sarah. Jason just stared, his mouth slightly agape, his earlier smugness completely vanquished, replaced by a bewildered, almost resentful disbelief. The silence from my family was deafening, a palpable void where their usual pronouncements and judgments should have been. Then, in her unscripted, heartfelt enthusiasm, Sarah inadvertently delivered the killing blow. The first major twist in the carefully constructed narrative of my inadequacy. It's funny, actually, she mused, a slight frown creasing her brow as she recalled something. Mark even mentioned hearing some people, quite wealthy and influential, he thought, talking rather dismissively about the Access Path founder at a charity gala he attended with his rehab group last year. Someone named Henderson, I think. They were apparently praising their son to the heavens, some finance whiz. And when someone asked about their other child, they sort of laughed and said she was working on some little website for the disabled. Very admirable in its own way, of course, but a shame she didn't follow a real career path like her brother. She paused. Her gaze swept from my ashen-faced father to my visibly trembling mother, a dawning, uncomfortable realization spreading across her own features as she finally connected the dots. They said the family name was Carter. Oh, goodness, she stammered, her hand flying to her mouth. I didn't realize. I am so sorry. Henderson. The name slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. Arthur Henderson. Dad's golfing buddy. His occasional confidant. The overheard phone call from months ago. The snippets of conversation I dismissed as typical parental grumbling now clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just passive ignorance on my parents' part, not just a failure to see or understand. This was active public dismissal. They had a narrative. Jason the success. Kayla the well-meaning but ultimately misguided hobbyist. And they'd been broadcasting it to their peers, to anyone who would listen, likely to shield themselves from the perceived shame of having a daughter who didn't fit their narrow definition of achievement. The little website. That phrase, more than anything, stung with a fresh, unexpected venom. Richard Carter, my usually impenetrable father, looked as though he'd been slapped. His face flushed a dark, mottled crimson, then paled again. Susan let out a small, wounded cry, a genuine sound of distress this time, not one of her usual performative sighs. We never understood the scale of it, Kayla, she whispered, her voice trembling. We just thought it was a small thing. Her voice trailed off, lost in the wreckage of her own carefully crafted illusions. The silence at the table was thick, suffocating. Sarah's parents looked utterly bewildered, glancing between their daughter, me, and my stunned parents, clearly struggling to comprehend the undercurrents of this family implosion. All eyes eventually turned to me. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a roaring in my ears, but beneath it, a profound, unexpected calm began to settle. The years of carefully suppressed resentment, of feeling invisible, of battling the crushing weight of their disapproval, began to recede like a tide going out. I looked directly at my father, then my mother, then Jason. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet, measured. devoid of triumph or accusation, filled only with a weary, undeniable truth. Access Path currently has over 80,000 active users across 15 states, I said. My goal is unwavering. We partner with 3 state healthcare agencies and have a significant backlog of national nonprofits wanting to integrate our services. Last quarter, we closed our Series A funding round with a lead investment from one of the top healthcare venture capital firms in the country. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply stated the facts. Facts that had always been true, whether my family had chosen to acknowledge them or not. The power dynamic in that opulent, suffocating room had fundamentally, irrevocably shifted. For the first time in my adult life, my father couldn't speak. He just stared at me, his mouth working silently. A man suddenly confronted with a reality he had long refused to see. The remainder of the engagement dinner passed in a blur of excruciating awkwardness. It was as if a bomb had gone off and we were all sifting through the emotional debris. Sarah's parents, to their credit, attempted to salvage the evening with polite, albeit strained conversation, now directing most of their questions about Access Path to me, with a newfound, almost fervent respect. I answered them calmly, factually, providing details about our mission, our technology, and our growth, careful to keep any hint of gloating from my voice. There was no need for it. The truth was potent enough on its own. My father remained uncharacteristically silent for the rest of the meal, his face a shifting landscape of shock, embarrassment, and, perhaps, just perhaps, a dawning, uncomfortable flicker of respect. He fumbled with his water glass, cleared his throat repeatedly, but offered no further pronouncements. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to shrink into herself. She made a few abortive attempts to explain their previous ignorance, her words dissolving into tearful, fragmented sentences like, We always wanted what was best for you, Kayla. We just didn't realize." Her signature sighs were still there, but they'd lost their theatrical power. Now they sounded more like the slow deflation of a punctured balloon. Jason was a study in sullen resentment. He picked at his exquisitely prepared, undoubtedly expensive food, his jaw tight, avoiding my gaze entirely. The golden boy smirk was gone, replaced by a resentful confusion that seemed to curdle his features. He looked like a king suddenly dethroned, bewildered by the abrupt shift in the kingdom's allegiance. I excused myself as soon as it was politely possible. The rich food I'd barely touched tasted like cotton in my mouth. The goodbyes were stiff, hurried, a collective desire to escape the suffocating atmosphere hanging over us all. Walking out of Latoil into the cool night air felt like surfacing for breath after being held underwater for too long. In the days that followed, my phone buzzed with an uncharacteristic frequency. My mother called multiple times, her voice thick with unshed tears and a newfound, almost cloying sweetness. "Kayla, darling, we need to talk. Your father and I, we are so incredibly proud of you. We didn't always show it properly, did we?" Her familiar sighs now sounded hollow, stripped of their manipulative edge. My father, a man who typically communicated in declarations or dismissive grunts, actually left a voicemail. His tone was gruff, as always, but laced with an uncharacteristic note of hesitancy, almost humility. "Kayla, it's your father. Your mother and I, we'd like to understand more about this Access Path, your company. Call me when you have a moment." I let the calls go to voicemail, listened to their messages with a strange detachment. The validation I had craved from them for so long, the approval I had once believed was essential to my self-worth, had finally arrived, gift-wrapped, in their shocked realization. But now that it was here, it felt anticlimactic, less important somehow than the quiet, steady validation I'd already found in my work, in the gratitude of Access Path users, and in the unexpected, objective affirmation from Sarah. I needed space, time to process not just their reaction, but my own. I did speak to Sarah. She called, her voice laced with genuine mortification, apologizing profusely if she'd caused any family strife. I reassured her, my gratitude sincere. "You didn't do anything wrong, Sarah," I told her. "You just told the truth." Something they hadn't been willing to hear from me. A bond of mutual respect, an unexpected alliance, formed between us during that call. She mentioned, almost as an aside, that Jason had been incredibly defensive and, frankly, impossible to talk to since the dinner, snapping at her over trivial things. That comment about Jason lingered. I knew I needed to talk to him, not for an apology. I wasn't sure he was capable of one, but for my own understanding. To close that particular, painful chapter. I met him for coffee a few days later, at a neutral, impersonal cafe downtown. He was immediately on the defensive, his old smugness attempting a weak resurgence. Look, I get it, okay? You're a big shot now. Ms. Tech genius. No need to rub it in. The words were bitter, laced with an envy he didn't bother to conceal. I kept my voice even, calm. This isn't about rubbing it in, Jason. This isn't a competition. I just want to understand something. Did you have any idea about Access Path? About its growth? Its impact? He scoffed, stirring his latte with unnecessary vigor. How would I know? You were always so secretive about your little projects, always off in your own world. I wasn't secretive, Jason, I said, my patience wearing thin. I tried to tell you. I tried to tell all of you, numerous times. You just weren't listening. I reminded him specifically of the TechCrunch article I'd emailed him the previous year, the one detailing our seed funding round, the one where I genuinely asked for his financial insights on scaling. His reply at the time, a memory that still stung, had been a flippant, one-line dismissal. Lil sis sounds like nerd stuff, lol. Stick to what you know and let me handle the real money. His facade finally cracked. He stared down into his coffee cup as if searching for answers in the swirling foam. All right, fine, he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. I saw the article. I even Googled Access Path after that. I knew it was getting big, bigger than I thought. I waited, letting the silence stretch. I didn't tell Mom and Dad the full extent of it, he finally confessed. The words tumbled out in a rush, his face flushed with a deep, unbecoming shame. You were always the artistic one, the sensitive one, the one who needed sheltering. I was the smart one, the responsible one, the one who was going to make them proud, financially. If you suddenly became this tech millionaire or whatever, where would that leave me? What would my role be then? It was just easier to let them keep thinking you were struggling a bit, kept things simpler. A wave of profound sadness washed over me, eclipsing any anger I might have felt. My own brother. This was the second, and perhaps more painful, twist. His deliberate, calculated decision to keep my success under wraps, to maintain his favored status, to protect his own fragile ego. This, I realized, was my true rock-bottom moment in terms of our old family dynamic. The final crushing realization of how deeply flawed, how conditional, their love and support had always been. The last vestiges of my childhood illusions about family loyalty crumbled into dust. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a void where those illusions used to reside. Armed with this painful clarity, I had one last difficult conversation with my parents together. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply, calmly laid out how their words, their actions, their relentless comparisons, and their dismissiveness had made me feel for the past decade. Your definition of success was so narrow, I told them. My voice steady, despite the tremor I felt deep inside. And because I didn't fit into it, I was made to feel inadequate, like a constant disappointment. I don't need you to understand Access Path's balance sheet now, or to be impressed by venture capital. I needed you to see me then, to value my efforts, regardless of the outcome. I told them I needed space, significant space, to redefine our relationship on new terms. My terms. There were more tears from my mother, a stunned, uncomfortable silence from my father. But as I walked away from that conversation, I felt a profound sense of release, as if a heavy weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I no longer needed their approval to feel worthy. I threw myself back into Access Path with a renewed vigor, a clearer sense of purpose. The company thrived. My relationships with David and my dedicated team, my chosen family, deepened. My interactions with my parents became infrequent, polite, and carefully managed by me, dictated by my own comfort level. The old toxic power dynamic was broken, shattered on the floor of that pretentious restaurant. Months later, I attended Jason and Sarah's wedding. I was polite to my parents, exchanged a civil, if distant, nod with Jason. But I had a genuinely warm, engaging conversation with Sarah, who greeted me with an open smile and sincere affection. As I watched my parents observe me from across the reception hall, I saw a complex mixture of emotions in their eyes: regret, confusion, and, perhaps, for the first time, a dawning, albeit distant, respect. I felt a sense of peace. I was no longer the family outcast, the perpetual failure. I was simply Kayla, a woman comfortable in her own skin, defined by her own achievements, walking her own path. The final scene of this chapter of my life isn't set in a tense family dinner or a sterile meeting room. It's me, standing on a stage at a major healthcare technology conference, the spotlight warm on my face. I'm giving a keynote speech about Access Path's mission, about the power of technology to bridge gaps and empower individuals. As I look out at the sea of faces in the auditorium, at the doctors, the patients, the advocates, the innovators, I feel a profound sense of fulfillment, a quiet joy that resonates deep in my bones. This is my validation. This is my success, defined on my own terms. For years, I allowed my family to write my story, casting me in the role of the daughter who faltered, the one who didn't measure up. It took an outsider's voice, an unexpected catalyst, to help me begin to reclaim my own narrative. But the real journey, I've come to understand, wasn't about forcing them to see me. It was about me finally seeing myself, recognizing my own worth, independent of their applause or their criticism. It was about understanding that true fulfillment comes not from fitting into a pre-drawn box, but from building something meaningful, from touching lives, from pursuing a purpose that sets your own soul on fire. What chapter of your own story are you ready to rewrite?